Good morning, and we are back here on Public Affairs on Peach with Dr. Stanley Feynman. Also joining us this morning, our meteorologist, Rodney Harris. Say good morning. Thanks for joining us, Rodney. Talk to us about how the weather plays a role in allergies.
Well, it's just like us. As it gets warmer, the pollens really start to get a lot higher. Obviously, in the winter, we don't do much. We don't like to go outdoors, but as you get toward the springtime, and those temperatures start to warm up, that's when you really start to get those high pollen counts. So typically around April, the beginning of April, once those temperatures start to reach into the 70s, that's when we really start to see the pollen take off. It's usually in April, but just a couple of weeks ago, we had temperatures in the 70s. So it's based a lot on the temperatures. Typically, the warmer and drier it is, the higher your pollen counts are going to be.
You know, sometimes when you're out there, you're doing the weather, you guys do something called a pollen count, and we're watching the pollen count go up one day, down another day. We're hoping it's going to rain, kind of wipe out some of that pollen. Last year, we broke records. It was up to 9,000 at one point, the pollen count, which is astronomical when you think about what they say is a high pollen count, what it used to be about 500.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that threshold has been risen to 1,500.
They changed the rules of the game.
Exactly, because the pollens are so high. And we're kind of called the pollen capital of the world in Atlanta.
Yeah, they say this is like the worst part you can be in.
Absolutely. And
Tennessee
that's because
and
of the climate here. It's a really interesting and unique climate that we have in Atlanta. Obviously, we're in the South, which means that a lot of your trees that thrive in the warmer weather are going to be active, but we also, especially as you head into the northern portions of Georgia, you got some trees that can thrive in colder weather too. So when you combine those, that's what really helps to produce those extremely high pollen counts, especially if you have a day where the wind is breezing. You start to get that pollen to blow around quite a bit.
Doctor, how do you get the pollen count?
Well, we are the certified pollen counting station for the metro Atlanta area, and we're certified by the National Allergy Bureau. And and we collect the pollen every day. We have certified pollen counters who specialize in using a particular device, and they count it every morning, and then we report it, and we usually report it out to the public, and people can get it on our website. We'll even send you a email with the pollen count on a daily basis and let you know what it is.
You know, talking about that device, you're basically, to our viewers at home, you're going out there into the certain areas, and you're basically capturing how much pollen is in one count. Right.
Well, that's true. The way we report it is we report numbers of pollen counts in a cubic meter of air over a 24-hour period. So the device basically samples a cubic meter of air. It's like a big box, like a big printer box, so to speak, of air, and they count the equivalent of the number of grains, pollen grains, and they can identify what types of pollen are out there. You know, it's interesting what you said was it's true. When the weather gets warmer and when we have the windy days, that's when we see the highest pollen counts, and we did see some very high pollen counts even in late January this year.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point, because we say typically it's April, but a lot of it is based on the temperature and the wind. So if you get temperatures like, for example, a mild winter where it's not as cold, then that means that your pollen season can really start a little bit earlier. So it has a lot to do with temperatures, and Brandon, you mentioned it earlier, because it's so warm here. That's one of the reasons why Atlanta not the best place if you have those allergies.
All right, school us in some of your allergy expertise.
Some highlights, because we get these questions this time of year, every single year, and so we just wanted to go over some of the things that you can look for here as we head toward the spring and even into the summertime. As I mentioned before, the pollen season can start really when the temperatures warm up, but typically that's around April, at least when those levels start to get really high. You should take a look at some of the graphics here. The other thing to remember about the pollen count is the fact that the hidden pollens are the worst in most cases. A lot of people see that yellow stuff, which is pine, and they think that that's really bad. That's what typically gets going first, but a lot of the pollens that you can't see are the ones that you have to worry about. And also always remember that the pollen is usually higher in the morning time. We usually get those weeds that start to kick in April, or the trees rather, followed by the weeds as we head throughout the summer. So it's the trees first, then the weeds. Of course, you can get your pollen count on CBS Atlanta News and at cbsatlanta.com. Of course, we'll keep you covered throughout the season, guys.
All right, Rodney, thank you. Dr. Aaron Gardner is also of the Allergy and Asthma Clinic. Dr. Gardner talking to us about some of the treatments. Good morning, and good to have you here.
Great.
So a lot of people say, okay, they've gone to Dr. Feynman. They said, listen, I have allergies. Now what? Now what do they do?
Well, first of all, I think, like you said, definitely it's important to figure out what you're allergic to. Because if you know what you're allergic to, we can predict when you're going to have symptoms and when you may benefit from medications from allergy symptoms.
Okay? All right, we know allergy season is upon us, right? We're waiting for it to kind of hit us really hard, the spring allergies. okay, let's go by what you say. If I do have allergies, and I typically had allergies, and perhaps I'm now getting treatment, what's something that I should have in my bathroom or in my kitchen just to be sure to kind of prep myself going into allergy season?
Okay. Well, definitely, I think if you are allergic to pollen, one of the recommendations that we make is making sure you're having your windows closed, air conditioning on. That way pollen is not getting into your household, okay?
Okay.
The other thing that I typically recommend is if you're outdoors for a long period of time, once you move indoors, removing your clothing, taking a shower, getting all that pollen off of your skin, because that actually can work to further reduce your symptoms from pollen allergies.
See, and I would think that if you if you're outside and you go inside, you automatically think that, all right, well, my allergies are going to go away. I didn't realize it could basically stay on your body and also irritate you. What are some of the things that you brought up here on the show this morning?
Well, many times...
we've all heard of the neti pot.
Yes, we've all
Does
heard
it
of
work?
So the neti pot, I'll be honest, a lot of times many people do like to use the neti pot. Simply what they end up doing is actually kind of physically flushing their sinuses to kind of get rid of that excess pollen that's in their sinuses, okay? But, many times I actually do recommend medications for allergy symptoms. So I will often recommend an antihistamine medication that can help with the runniness, the sneezing, the itchiness that people feel with allergy symptoms. And many times I will couple that antihistamine together with a nasal steroid spray.
And there's a difference here, and I think it's important, and Doctor, you might want to tune into this as well, is that there's a difference between the steroid spray and also your Afrins that are at the store. Because people can get addicted to the nasal spray Afrin and others like it. And it's not doing the same thing that the steroid's supposed to do.
That's a big problem. And we do see patients who say, well, I don't want to use a nasal spray because I don't want to get addicted to it. The nasal steroid sprays are basically healing sprays. The cortisone is basically heals inflammation and helps to cure and take care of inflammatory conditions. So when you use it topically, locally in the nose, it helps that inflammation that we see from the allergic reaction. And in fact, it heals the inflammation that's in the nose. So it really helps patients, and you're not going to get addicted. And fortunately, there's very minimal amount of absorption, so we see very, very few side effects from it.
Now, looking at the negative side of something like an Afrin or other types of, those immediate nasal sprays that kind of make you feel as if you're able to breathe clear. What's the addiction rates to that, and how hard is it to get off of something like that?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, Afrin can cause actually what we call rebound congestion, okay? So many times people use the over-the-counter nasal sprays working to help relieve that congestion, and they like it because it works right away. But once you start using it for 2, 3, and 4 days, you can actually get congestion that occurs from using the nasal spray itself. So people find that they're addicted, so to speak, to that nasal spray and actually cannot stop taking the nasal spray simply because they get congestion once they stop taking it.
All right, very good. And I use something called H2 Ocean. It's more of like, the saline spray that you can, you spray up into your nose. The difference between that and the neti pot?
Well, I think it's actually somewhat similar to the neti pot in that they both use saline, and I think for some people it's very soothing, and again, it can kind of maybe flush some of the pollen out, but it's not something that I really expect to help relieve congestion. As you said, I do think that the steroid nasal sprays kind of have that healing effect, and that, they actually work to kind of suppress the inflammation that's occurring in your nose, and when used on a daily basis, it does work to help relieve that congestion that can occur from allergy symptoms.
Yeah, it's very important, just to make another point from what Dr. Gardner was saying, is that people really need to work with their allergist to find out what works best for them. Because some people might like one thing, some people might prefer something else. So we have a lot of tools that we can use that help patients. And so that's why it's good to get the accurate diagnosis and the proper medical regimen planned.
And in the over-the-counters, you've got your Zyrtex out there, you've got your Claritins. What do you feel about both of those?
I actually think they're very helpful. I think these antihistamine medications are very helpful for runniness, sneezing, the itchiness that occurs with allergy symptoms. But when it comes down to it, for some people, it's just not enough. So again, it is important to work with your allergist just in case you are having symptoms despite using those medications, because there are other options for therapy and treatment for allergies.
All right, very good. Doctor, stay here. We're going to do some myth questions when we come back. Stay with us.